Hi there, my name's Dan, and for those of you that know a little bit about RAAW, you probably know that we're a massive bunch of bike geeks. Now, I also imagine that if you press play on this video, you're also a bit of a bike geek too. Our DH bike, the Yalla, has been in development since actually 2019, when Ruben and I started to jot down notes about maybe what a RAAW DH bike could look like. The concept was pretty simple. We wanted to make a bike that could send it down Champery World Cup track. But simple doesn't always mean easy in development. From that point up until now, we've done a lot of chin scratching, a hell of a lot of riding, testing, and even gone racing. A bike is a meeting of hundreds of details, and it's the careful balance of all of them that goes into making a great bike. There's so many details in there that we thought it was actually best to make an in-depth video to go through them, as some of them are pretty plain to see, whereas others are a little bit hidden away and have a cool story about how we arrived at what we did. None of the details or numbers on the Yalla were pulled out of thin air. Ruben and I have been riding and developing bikes for a long time now, and all the while we've been doing it and thinking about what's going on, we've been trying to relate numbers to feelings and vice versa. So grab a coffee, sit back, and we'll dive into all the in-depth details about the new RAAW Yalla. The Yalla is available in 3 sizes, M, L, and XL, which should cover riders from around 167 all the way up to the dizzying heights of 2 meters. Fit is obviously going to have a certain element of personal preference in there, but we've designed it so that if you already ride, say, an L on the Madonna or the Jib, you're likely going to be the same size on the Yalla. The intent of the Yalla is pretty similar to the Madonna, which is why the bikes actually share the same reach number. They both kind of want to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. But bike fit is always personal, and so the Yalla comes with a great number of adjustments that allow you to change the shape, the fit, and also the ride feel of the bike. The Yalla is designed around 29-inch wheels front and rear, and we did that for a few reasons. For us, a bike that's designed around 1 wheel size is going to have more chance to ride better than a bike that's designed to try and fit 2 wheel sizes in. When you design a bike around 2 different wheel sizes, either one or even both of those wheel sizes might have a lot of compromise in them, and that's going to affect the way the bike rides. For us, designing a bike around 1 wheel size, 29 front and rear, gave us the ability to really dial in the geometry, have really sorted suspension, and have all the adjustability in the frame that we wanted. A mullet setup is something though that we've tested with the race team, and it does have its place with certain riders on certain tracks, but it is something that pushes the bike into one extreme of its adjustment window and takes away from lots of the adjustability that we wanted. In reality though, it is possible to always throw a 27.5 wheel into a bike that was designed around 29-inch wheels. There is space there. But this is not something we advise, as it's going to drop the bike too low and adversely change the geometry too far away from how we designed it. If you'd like to experience the Yalla in the way that we intended, while having all the adjustability as well, we suggest to use 29-inch wheels front and back. Give it a go. You might actually be surprised at how well this thing corners with the big wheels. The head tube of the Yalla sits in its stock setting at 63 degrees. We chose this for its balance of bringing stability to the bike while not putting the front wheel so far away that it's in a different postcode. We did give the ability to change the angle, but we'll go into that in a little bit later. But suspension also ties into head angle here and what happens when you actually get on the bike, what the dynamic shape of it is when you throw a leg over it and go for a ride. When designing the Yalla, we looked at the forks from the likes of Fox, Öhlins, and RockShox. And another interesting point is that on a DH fork, you have the ability to adjust the axle to crown, which is a useful tool. We designed the fork around a 602mm axle to crown, knowing that this is the minimum that it's going to be, and that if you raise the fork up, it's actually pushing all the geometry numbers in a positive way. We also designed around a 50 to 52mm fork offset, as this gave the best balance for us between front end grip and steering feel. We combined that with a stem length of between 35 and 50mm for exactly the same balance in steering feel and the grip you're going to get off the front wheel. Many of the details on the Yalla show little thought of what went into them. One of those is the head tube length. We chose 110mm for a few reasons. One was that it doesn't need as many spaces to get your bars in a good height. It spreads apart the top tube and the down tube to bring a little more strength in that junction, and it still allows you to take full advantage of the fork length adjustment that you have with dual crown forks. In the middle of the bike, the reach numbers grow from 455 for the medium through 480 for the L size, all the way up to 505mm for the XL. We designed it to be roomy and bring stability through the length of the reach while not being overly long and unmanageable. At RAAW, we love low BB heights. It's really one of the features that goes into defining so much of the character of the Madonna and the jib. And it's definitely something we carried over to the Yalla. The BB height on the Yalla sits at 26.5mm below the axles, which gives it around a 345mm BB height from the ground. That BB height for us is super nice as you feel in the bike rather than perched on it, and it gives such confidence and purpose when you corner the bike. Now, BB height will change a bit dependent on the wheel, tyre and fork setup that you've got going, but this is one thing that we've tied together with supportive suspension so that we can take advantage of a low BB height without sinking too far in there with too squishy suspension and skimming pedals all day long. These two things, low BBs and supportive suspension, are so much of the character of what makes a RAAW. We also did a bunch of research into real-world tyre measurements, as sometimes what you get in 2D is not what you're going to pump up. We used the real-world tyre measurements to design the geometry around, knowing that when we put our geometry in real life, it's going to be accurate. But we also used the clearance measurements from the 2D, which are a little bit bigger, that give the bike tons of clearance for when you bottom the frame out and things are moving around, and also when you're riding in muddy conditions. This BB height also ties into our recommendation of max 165mm long cranks. But if you want to run shorter, that's not a problem. Things like the seat position come from our past experiences with riding loads of DH bikes. We wanted the seat out of the way for when things like the wheel are moving around, but also wanted to have plenty of clearance for when things are wild and you're making crazy shapes on the bike. The seat position we landed on gives a solid reference for the seat when it's needed, but gives plenty of room for when you're riding the bike to move the bike and yourself around. Completing the front to back of the geometry of the bike, we chose a chainstay length that was going to give us a good balance to the front end length, while also playing its part in the stability of the bike. Long chainstays can be maneuverable, and this is something we considered also with the suspension of the bike, as a supportive suspension system is also going to sap away less of the rider's inputs and make that long chainstay not only stable, but agile. Riding a bike fast and aggressively needs a pilot, not a passenger. Each Yalla frame comes with a chainstay in the mid setting, so for the M it's 445mm, for the L it's 450, and for the XL it's 455mm long. With all the wild and wacky suspension systems out there, why did we choose this layout for the Yalla? Well, it wasn't just to keep a family look, but it did come from all the same reasons as to why we chose this layout for the Madonna and the jib. A 4-bar suspension system gives us the freedom to manipulate all the suspension characteristics. We're not fixed to a physical main pivot which defines so much of the bike. Instead, we've got a virtual pivot that we can move around to manipulate what we want. Long link lengths naturally give the suspension favourable characteristics from the get-go and allow us to fine-tune the pivot positions to get the suspension curves we want, all the while safe in the knowledge that production tolerances will have less of an effect on the way the bike rides. And if there is a bit of a difference between the 3D model and the frame in real life, we know that it's still going to ride the way we intended. A rocker link with a horse pivot outback has fewer parts of the frame overlapping and reduces the complexity of the main frame and the rear end at the same time. It also naturally leaves less nooks and crannies in the frame for mud to collect and trail debris to be compacted when frame parts are moving around. It also spreads apart the two connections between the rear triangle and the main frame, which naturally brings in a bit more stiffness without the need for complex pivot hardware. For us, the layout that we've used on the Yalla and all the other RAAW bikes does the job that we want it to in the most simple and efficient way possible. Now, when it comes to suspension design and analysis, we really are geeks, but not to the level of being a mad professor locked away in a lab, as we do like to ride bikes and see the sun sometimes. And while there are a few softwares out there which are specifically for designing bike kinematics, over the past decade, we've actually been developing our own kinematic software that integrates directly into our 3D software that allows us to be real efficient with the way we design our kinematics. Our kinematic file is able to propose pivot positions for the targets that we input and then give us the ability to fine-tune pivot positions afterwards to really play around and nail exactly what we want in the suspension. But it's not just as easy as plug a bunch of numbers in and you get your kinematic out the other end. It took us 8 different kinematics before we finally got to the one that balanced the suspension, geometry, adjustability, and packaging in the Yalla that we wanted. With each new version, we chin-scratched a hell of a lot while also consulting our beloved mentors to get as much good information as we can to make the best and informed decision possible. A rider is a little 1/4 horsepower motor violently moving all over the place on even the least rowdiest of rides. This makes it pretty damn difficult to simulate in a computer. But we look to analyze as close to the real world as possible while using honest assumptions for things like center of gravity, positions for analyzing things like anti-squat and anti-rise. We use the suspension system on the Yalla to manipulate the relationship between what the wheel is doing and what the shock is doing. We do that over 198 millimeters of travel, and that's in the mid settings. In reality, that travel range runs from 194 all the way up to 203 mm of travel when we consider all the adjustment options. At RAAW, we look less to hit a predefined travel target dictated by the riding world. Instead, we look to the quality of travel that we've got. Downhill bikes generally have around 200 mm of travel though, but we also looked to how much shock stroke was available to make sure the bike compressed how we wanted it and also rebounded out of its travel. Having a smooth leverage ratio curve in the right range is what defines the quality of the travel. And for 75 mm stroke shocks with our desire to balance bump absorption, traction, support and bottom out resistance, we chose 25% of progression starting at just under 3.1. Now we've ridden a lot of DH bikes over the years, from the extremes of crazy progressive all the way through to flatline linear, each with its pros and cons that, from riding, we figured out. For us, going too linear gave a huge compromise between suppleness and bottom out, while going too progressive made the whole bike just feel like a waterbed. The leverage ratio curve is smooth, which promotes predictability not only when you're riding the bike, but also tuning shocks. And we've tried to make it as predictable as possible in the portions of travel that you're going to spend the most amount of time in. We even took into account things like the bottom out bumpers in the shock when we started to add the shock rate to the leverage ratio to get something called the wheel rate. How that wheel rate builds its force throughout travel is also really important to us, and we look to make that as predictable as what the shock was seeing through the leverage ratio. Now, it's doubtful that many of you are grinding up a tarmac fire road for an hour on your downhill bike. So the way we look at how the bike accelerates on a DH bike is quite different to how we would look at it on a Madonna or Jib. When you pedal a DH bike, you're likely stood up, and if this is in a race, it's probably going to be with quite a bit of gusto. That means your center of gravity is going to be in a different position than when you're seated, and there's likely going to be more bits of your body moving cyclically around trying to compress the suspension while you're pedaling. There's also more than one way to accelerate a bike other than just pedaling. Landing on the downslope of a jump, letting off the brakes in a really steep section, even pumping are going to accelerate the bike and introduce a load transfer. The anti-squat of the Yalla, which means how the bike is going to react to the load transfers from acceleration, is designed to give you the support in the bike that you're going to need when you're sprinting out of the gate or sprinting for the finish line, while not being so high as to adversely affect the suspension. On a normal DH cassette, which ranges between about 24 teeth to 10 teeth, gives the Yalla an anti-squat range of between 118% and 149%. The anti-squat also drops off as the bike goes deeper into its travel, slowing down any possible interaction from the chain. When you encounter an impact, pedal the bike, or even lock the rear wheel, you're going to get some influence from the chain in the suspension system. As we mentioned, we didn't want to design the suspension system that then brought too much of that chain's influence and made it a starring role of the production. Our layout is essentially a high-low pivot. Going much higher with the main pivot would have brought in the need for an idler, which opens up a whole different can of worms. In all our riding and racing on the Yalla, we've actually done a lot of testing with O-chains. Now, while this is something that does work well on our bike, it's something that's not necessary to make it work, as the bike will ride perfectly well without it. It's also something that comes with its own set of pros and cons, as is everything on a bike. Feel free to ride the Yalla with or without, but feel safe in the knowledge that we've really scrutinized every facet of the bike and also made sure that our bike works well with technologies from different companies. In a similar but opposite manner, the bike's attitude is going to change when you pull on the anchors and slow it down. You can also slow down a bike in more than one way than just pulling the brakes and other than hitting a tree. How the bike handles these effects of deceleration is called anti-rise. On the Yalla, we wanted to again strike a balance, this time between combating the tendency of the bike to rise up out of its travel when you brake, the ability of it to remain supple while absorbing impacts, while also having a good feel of what's going on at the rear contact patch. Too little anti-rise and a bike can feel vague in that regard. Too much anti-rise and a bike can start to feel harsh. The Yalla hovers at around 50% throughout travel, striking that balance that we wanted in all the characteristics, while remaining predictable all the way to the end of travel. Mountain bikes need to fit a lot of different components from a lot of different manufacturers. In the case of shocks, no two are the same in size, shape, and their performance. We wanted to make sure that the Yalla could fit as many different shocks as possible in there. Now we work closely with Fox and Öhlins, so all options from those two manufacturers will fit in there, as well as being offered as options to purchase with the frame kit. But we also made sure that shocks from the likes of RockShox, Mazzocchi, EXT and DVO are also going to fit in the frame in all of its different setup options. Why so adjustable? Well, for us, tinkering with a bike is fun. We enjoy it a hell of a lot here at RAAW. But more than that, it gives us the ability to make a bike adaptable for different riders, tracks and conditions, which really turns a bike into a useful tool. It's our toolbox concept. Solid to not compromise on our philosophies of a durable bike, and simple to use so that anyone can do it. After all, if an adjustment is easy to use, then it's going to encourage more people to play around with it and find out more about their bike. We ride bikes in a lot of different places around the world, and there is something to be said for just grabbing a bike and going for a ride. But I've yet to find something as satisfying as doing some pre-ride tinkering, only to find that it works like an absolute dream when you're out on the trails. The feeling of a bike with an absolutely dialed chassis and suspension is really hard to beat. The differences between places like Champery and Whistler might not be completely night and day, but having a bike adjustable to suit those two different places can allow us to extract the most amount of fun out of it, and while we're at the races, extract the most amount of speed. All that said, if you're not a fan of tinkering, then absolutely no worries. The bike comes delivered in all the mid settings. The mid settings of each adjustment range are really something that we scrutinized and put a lot of time into thinking about. You can leave it there and just grab your bike and go for a ride. And that simplicity and solidness means the various adjustment pieces will quietly go about their job. Using a 56mm diameter headset is a common standard, so it means that if you're in a pinch, it should be easy to get parts. Being 56mm diameter gives us the room inside the head tube to adjust reach and angle while keeping the bearings zero stack. External bearing adjustment cups often counteract most of the reach adjustment that they're trying to achieve. 63 degrees is the base setting, but if you want something more stable or conversely something more agile, then we've got the ability to adjust by 1 degree either way, ranging from 62 all the way up to 64 degrees. Flat out tracks, think vintage Mont Saint Anne, might benefit from a slacker head angle, bringing a bit more stability, whereas flatter, more picky technical tracks might actually benefit from the opposite by being a little bit steeper to bring a bit more agility to the bike. You can also change the reach of the bike by plus or minus 5mm. This not only changes the fit of the bike, but it's also going to change how much load you have on the front and rear wheels, and also adjust the stability and agility of the bike too. Lots of the races that we've supported are from the UK, where lots of the UK race tracks are pretty akin to racing a Star Wars speeder through the trees. Stability is needed, but a shorter bike, in part from a shorter reach, is going to bring the ability to whip it around the trees as fast as possible. Lots of bike park riders are also going to probably enjoy a shorter bike to cater more to the man-made nature of the tracks and the manicured berms and jump radiuses that they're going to encounter. On the contrary, riders and racers looking to attack some of the more aggressive World Cup tracks are going to be welcoming a longer bike. It's not so much adjustability that it's going to be a complete new size of frame, but the adjustment is going to bring the stability needed to have the confidence in the bike to lift your eyeline and really think about what's coming rather than what your bike is doing underneath you. The reach adjustment also gives the ability to fine-tune fit. We wanted to keep the bike representative of the size of riders we thought ride in the Yalla. This experience coming a lot from our own DH riding, while also the Jib and the Madonna. But if you already know that you'd feel a little less stretched out or a little less cramped up on one of the Yalla sizes, then you know you've got the tools to change the fit of the bike, which is also going to change the feel and make you have a better ride. We can also change the reach and head angle in combination. So if you like the sound of longer and slacker, not a problem. Or if you prefer the idea of shorter and steeper, then we've also got you covered. Our own headset cups are designed to be a doddle to use with clear and accurate markings on both the cups and the frame. And a solid press fit ensures that there's not going to be any creakiness from there and the need to glue cups in like some race teams actually have to do. Our stock BB height is around 345mm from the ground static. As we've mentioned with our suspension design, it means we can exploit a low BB for its ability to have stability and confidence in cornering without compromising on ride height. But we've also given the options to fine tune this BB height, and so you can go +3mm or -3mm under that stock height. Now you can raise it up if you need more clearance, think trying to get over the janky rocks of Snowshoe, or if you want a little bit more stability and to be a bit more in the bike, you can even drop it for that. Also, if you prefer to run a slightly softer suspension setup, then you can raise the BB back up to not be having any problems. And on the other side, if you prefer a firmer setup, you can drop the BB back down to get yourself back in the bike. So far, all the adjustments we've been talking about are more static adjustments. So when the bike's just sat there with no rider on it, you can measure their change. The suspension adjustments we've built into the bike are more of a dynamic adjuster and really come into effect when you throw a leg over and chuck the bike down a hill. Our stock suspension setting has 25% of progression, starting at a leverage ratio of 3.08 and finishing at 2.31. For us, this gave the best balance of all the suspension characteristics and comes back to that idea that if you're not into tinkering, you can just leave it in the mid setting and go and grab your bike. But it is possible to adjust the suspension progression by ±3%, also adjusting the leverage ratios in the process. The idea is that we change the leverage ratios of the portions of travel that you spend more time in when you're riding your bike. If your bike is set up well, you usually will be spending more time in the first 2/3 of travel rather than the last third of travel clanging off the bottom out bumper all day long. If you are set up like that, then maybe we need to have some words about your bike. Adjusting the suspension in these portions of travel means that they have more of an effect, more of the time, and can be felt more easily. Amongst my close group of friends that all ride together, there's already such a change in setup preferences that it makes it super hard to try and make a bike work for everyone when it has no adjustment. They often have to get pretty creative with volume spacers and shock tunes to make the bike work in a way that they want it to. But when they do get it working in somewhat the right ballpark, then the confidence on track is immediately noticeable. And in the same flavor as our headsets, you can combine BB height and suspension progression. If you want to run a higher BB with more progression, not a problem. If you fancy lower with lower progression, we've also got you covered there. Out back, we use the same system to adjust chainstay length as on our Madonna and jib, just that the axle is a little bit longer to account for the downhill wide 157mm hubs. The other main difference to the Madonna and jib is that on the Yalla, the range is what adjusts between the different frame sizes. Each frame will come with the axle in the mid setting, but as the frame sizes get bigger, that mid setting will grow by 5mm each time. M sits at 445mm, L sits at 450, and XL sits at 455. This means that the balance to the front of the bike is maintained while also giving a usable chainstay length range for each size of rider. M size riders can go down to the shortest chainstay length of 440mm, while XL riders can go all the way up to the longest at 460mm. For us, that balance is more important than trying to get the shortest chainstay length on all frame sizes. We feel that you can ride a bike harder and have a better feel out of the bike if the bike is balanced. And as mentioned before, the chainstay length also ties in to our suspension design. So even at 460mm, those XL riders are still going to have a supportive system so that when they put their inputs into the bike's going to do what they want it to. Chainstay length is going to adjust the stability, agility balance, while also adjusting the load that you're going to have on the front and rear wheels. It's surprising just how much change in feel you can get at the front of a bike from making an adjustment out back. Shorter chainstays are going to then bring in more agility into the bike, especially in movements like bunny hops and pulling a manual. But as we're not designing a slopestyle bike here, even at 440 on its shortest setting for the medium riders, it's still in tie-in with our concept of a bike built for sending it. Moving away from all the adjustments, we now come into the frame design. Durability is at the core of RAAW. We want bikes that you can ride hard and put away dirty and that last for year after year and owner after owner. Above all, a durable product that lasts is perhaps the most environmentally conscious thing that we can do. We chose aluminium not just for its recyclability, but more for us, it's not just a cheap man's carbon. Aluminium is a wonderful material that can be formed, forged, and CNC'd into a whole host of shapes that fits the purpose of a downhill bike so well. It can also be made into incredibly efficient and lightweight structures too. Our Yalla frame in medium weighs in at just over 4 kilos, which is actually a lot lighter than many aluminium frames and also a bunch of carbon frames that are out there too. It's all horses for courses though, but aluminium fits our vision of what a DH bike needs to be just so well. While we've tried to make the Yalla as durable as possible, it's inevitable that at some point you will need to wheel it into the workshop to give it a bit of TLC. Mountain biking is hard on bikes, downhill especially, and for that reason we wanted to make a bike that was easy to work on for not just the home mechanics out there, but also race mechanics around the world. I don't know anyone that's got the time for a mid-practice session brake bleed or needing 16 tools just to tighten all the pivots up. Cable routing is all external. You only need a few common tools to take it all apart, and you don't need 2 degrees and 4 pairs of hands to put it all back together again. We do like to spend some weight on our pivot hardware. We ask a lot from our pivots, so we outfit them all with big bearings at every single point they move. This ensures a supple feeling in the suspension and also ensures it for a long time. When Remy Thirion crossed the line at Crankworx Léger 2016, his bike weighed 7 kilos more than when it left the start hut. Having enough nooks and crannies in a bike to carry 7 kilos of mud is no mean feat, so we wanted our Yalla to resist carrying mud as much as possible. The back of the bike, from the top of the seat tube all the way down to the chainstay bridge, is as much of a continuous vertical surface as possible, giving little anchors for mud. A knife-like seat stay bridge ties the 2 sides of the bike together while cutting through the onslaught of mud and spray that comes off the back wheel. Forgings are hollowed out from the inside as to not leave holes here, there and everywhere for mud to collect in. This also makes the bike super easy to clean and take care of. The rear axle system keys into the dropouts using simple and reliable shapes. This ties both sides of the bike together at one of its extremities. It also resists the rear axle of the bike undoing from scissoring when you're riding. It also stops any undoing of the rear axle while also being an adjustable system. Big wheels with big speeds often calls for bigger rotors. The Yalla comes with 203 brake mounts as standard, but 220s are also available and offer a really clean and rigid fixation to the frame to resist all the forces coming from big rotors. We've got a down tube protector made from 5mm thick soft rubber that simply sticks to the down tube and covers the full width of it, even the little corners on the sides. The chainstay protector is made from the same soft rubber and covers the full length of the chainstay and resists any chain slap that could happen. The chainstay protector can also be stuck to the frame, and it features a ribbed pattern to silence chain slap. There's a pre-cut silicone piece that sticks on the inside of the right seat stay, which also resists chain slap. We've also got available a stick-on shuttle guard that uses the same rubber and sticks up near the top of the down tube to resist any marks from any shuttles, or if you've got a lift that's got a hook that goes under the down tube. All external cable routing makes working on the bike a simple task, especially in a rush at a race, while keeping all the cables secure and tidy. The upper cable guides on the frame also double up as the fork bumpers and are designed to work with all the different fork offsets out there and offer a big soft pad to dissipate the energy between the fork and the frame hitting when you have a crash. As much as possible, hardware is shared between the Yalla, the Madonna and the jib. While this does make it easier from our side, the aim is to make it easy for you guys, meaning that you don't need to carry as many spares for the different bikes, and that if you've got a derailleur hanger, then it fits for all the frames we do. 10 28mm diameter bearings and 2 52mm diameter bearings are designed with the same hubcap style sealed away system as we've got on the Madonna and the jib. Every single pivot is designed to be sealed away from dust, mud and water and guarantees long-term performance. Like the Madonna and the jib, the shock bushings have been replaced with bearings to also enhance the suppleness of the suspension. With the addition of 9/10 of naffle weight, why not have the ability for a bit of gear storage or even to carry a banana on your downhill bike? If you don't want it, no worries, then it's hidden away nicely under the top tube. All gear straps fit, and maybe even the odd data acquisition system with a 3D printed bracket. There are a lot of details on the Yalla that we spent a lot of time scrutinizing. Hopefully in going through these details, we've given you a peek behind the curtain of why the Yalla is the way it is, while also going through a lot of the adjustment features that we've built into the bike. If you're already asleep, then we hope you enjoy the following videos brought to you by an algorithm. But we know we might not have covered absolutely everything, and there might be something left over before you pull the trigger and hit buy. We've put a lot of effort and articles into our support page, which is accessible off the main RAAW website. Here you can find more information on setup, specs, compatibility, and a lot more. But as is always the case with RAAW, we're happy to answer any and all questions you might have before you buy, during, and even when you have any problems. You can get in touch with us directly at hello@raawmtb.com and speak to a real person who knows the bike inside and out. Hopefully you've enjoyed all the details of the Yalla, and we'll see you out on the trails.